this week's episode of Superhero Saturday, we're rolling a morality check as we examine the ways to use the alignment chart to analyze and design fictional characters. Grab your D20s, super friends, and let's play! Hello, super friends, and welcome to another episode of Superhero Saturday, where we talk about the arts of superheroes, storytelling, and so much more. My name is Annie, and while I may still be pretty much a noob when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons, I am an absolute professional when it comes to the art of designing characters. Literally, I've written 4 books. You can go to our website right now at www.fearless9.com and check out what I've written. Shameless plug. One of the foundational methods of creating and analyzing characters in the various iterations of D&D is to use a tool called the Moral Alignment Chart. In today's video, we're going to dig a little bit into this tool and see the different ways that you can use it to analyze different character development styles and maybe develop your own characters as well. So, let's get started. The Moral Alignment Chart itself is pretty straightforward. There are 3 rows and 3 columns, and at each intersection you find an archetype that describes the character's general moral compass or personal style. In the traditional method, which is used consistently throughout different types of Dungeons & Dragons and role-playing games, the x-axis describes the character's moral tendencies, either good, neutral, or evil. On the y-axis, we see the character's level of adherence to order, as described either lawful, neutral, or chaotic. Therefore, your character's personal style includes both an x-axis descriptor and a y-axis descriptor, like lawful evil or neutral good. But what do these descriptors mean on their own axes and when they cross paths? Let's examine the traditional way of using this tool. For the moral tendencies on the x-axis, it's pretty straightforward. A hero character who's always trying to save the world will typically fall into the good category, and a villain who's trying to destroy the world is categorized as evil. A neutral character either finds some kind of balance between good and evil, whether on purpose or accidentally, or alternatively, they can be swayed either to the good side or the dark side. For a quick example, let's put some superhero genre characters on the scale. Superman for good, Doomsday for bad, and Lex Luthor for neutral. Yes, I'm putting Lex Luthor as neutral, and that might sound a little bit weird to some of you, but let me pitch it to you this way. While in the most basic storylines, Lex Luthor is trying to take over the world in some way, a lot of the times, most of his plans are actually for the benefit of humankind, whether through charitable donations, or different types of organizations, or providing jobs for the city of Metropolis, whatever. Really, the only truly evil things that precipitate out of this character arc is that he wants to destroy Superman, and kind of have power over everything. But that's not necessarily a bad thing if he uses that power for good. Is it? You decide. And in some of my favorite iterations of Lex Luthor, this is a character that is torn between the forces of good and evil. And while in the end he usually succumbs to the dark side, oftentimes he is pulled between both poles and could be convinced to be a good guy. And that's opposed to characters like Doomsday, who basically want to take over or destroy or enslave the world. Basic big bad right there. Next, we have the law versus chaos spectrum on the y-axis. This one is a little less straightforward, but it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. A character who has a tendency to follow the rules, whether their own or those imposed by some outside establishment, will fall into the lawful category. Whereas a character whose motivation is often to challenge that establishment or to be completely spontaneous would fall into the chaotic category. A neutral character in this sense would again either be pulled between either side or seek some kind of balance between the two. For example, Captain America is usually characterized as a pretty lawful character. Although sometimes he considers himself to be above the law of the people, he is never above his own moral code, and that is what he clings to always. Iron Man, on the other hand, is rarely predictable. Sometimes he is just out there trying to be as good as he thinks he can, and other times he's just building machines because he wants to, regardless of what the consequences may be. Or in some of the worst cases, he gets really mad and leans really in toward things that are morally questionable, if not bad. So that makes him a chaotic character. A neutral character in the Marvel Universe might be Vision, which is kind of interesting because he's a machine, so you might think that he would just be lawful to his own programming, but it doesn't seem to be quite as straightforward as that. Because he is a computer, technically, none of his choices are really motivated by good or evil. While his choices are predetermined by his programming, his actions can't necessarily be considered good or evil. It's only from the outside, from the consequences of those choices, that one might be able to say that it had good consequences or bad consequences. It's kind of the old argument of whether a gun is inherently evil or not. Sure, it shoots people and kills people and causes destruction, but in itself, it doesn't really have the capacity to make a moral decision. It's an inanimate object. And while we can argue that Vision is not an inanimate object, he has a soul, something to do with the soul stone, blah, 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 it's kind of either or, which makes him a neutral character. Oddly enough, on both axes, the neutral type characters are really the most interesting to watch because the tension of not knowing how they will react to the different circumstances as the plot progresses makes them completely unpredictable and therefore more compelling. Especially when you cast someone like Paul Bettany in the role. Okay, so that's the most basic description of the two axes of the moral alignment chart. But what happens when you combine those terms? What does it mean when these overlap and become a certain character archetype? Because both Iron Man and the Joker are chaotic characters, but their presentation of personality is very different. Let's dig in a little further by using an example from the Batman universe. I think this is going to be a really good example for us because the Batman verse has a really big range of characters, good and evil, and they fall all over the chart. In fact, I think if you just went with the character Robin, you would have enough to fill up every square. Quick disclaimer, all of these examples are just based on my own experiences and the types of characters that turn out to be my favorites in different stories. So if you have a different opinion on which character falls into which category, put it in the comments below because I love arguing these things out. And if you have a better example, I want to hear it. With that out of the way, let's get going into our example chart. We're gonna click through all 9 of these different personality types pretty quickly, so be following along at home, super friends. Let's start in the upper left corner at lawful good. Here we have Commissioner Gordon, who is a man of the law, literally, and is always looking out for the good of the people of Gotham. Next we have neutral good, where I've put Alfred. He's a good guy, of course, and he follows the rules, but he is often a surprise. In a crisis situation, you're not always sure what he's going to do next. Then on the upper right, for chaotic good, we have Batman. Because let's face it, no mentally stable person would put on a batsuit and scare criminals thinking it will change the world for the better. He's the world's greatest detective and always has a plan, but really you never know what he'll do, except that he thinks he is doing good. On the center left, for lawful neutral, we have Catwoman. While she's never really completely been one of the good guys, she typically follows her own code, aka her own selfish goals. Actually, I prefer it when she gets tricked or convinced to join in on the occasional mission with the good guys. It makes for a great storyline. At true neutral, or the center of the alignment chart, we have Two-Face, who can be swayed with relative ease toward one way or the other. In fact, Two-Face and Harvey Dent, although technically the same person, could be considered to have 2 different alignments in the same body, with Harvey as the lawful good lawyer and Two-Face as the chaotic evil villain. But that might be too deep an analysis to get into right now, so let's get back to the board. Our chaotic neutral character is Harley Quinn. She's basically as chaotic as it gets, but sometimes she's a sort of hero and a lot of times she's just following the Joker around and causing general mayhem. She could go either way, which makes her neutral. Now onto the final row. Our lawful evil character is Bane, who, though generally a force for chaos in his amplified state, seems to follow a set moral guideline for himself. He has clear plans, priorities, and motivations that are consistent throughout his character development, and that makes him pretty lawful to me. But he's also evil, and therefore he lands in the lower left corner. Next, we have neutral evil. This is Poison Ivy. Her whole shtick is that she wants nature to resume its rightful place in Gotham, even though that basically means taking over the whole city and usurping the rights of other humans, which is inherently evil. However, sometimes she is very precise with her plans, and other times she is given over to the whims of her emotions, making her a neutral character. And finally, with the most predictable square on the Batman chart, we have the Joker as our chaotic evil alignment.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
I mean, do I have to say anything else? Okay, so now that we've got a feel for the whole alignment chart and how things work and the different examples, let me throw a monkey wrench into the machine and turn the whole thing upside down. While the axis of good to evil makes for a nice, convenient way to design superheroes, civilians, and supervillains, the real world of morality is hardly as black and white as this. Sure, you can use this chart to create your own superhero genre characters, and they can be totally great. But I personally like to follow a slightly different version of the x-axis, which I found on the internet a couple years back, I think, and I've been using ever since, although I forgot where I got it from. The thing is, most human beings hardly ever think of themselves as being truly evil. It's actually very unrealistic and hardly ever happens. Even Hitler thought he was a good guy, otherwise how would he convince so many people to follow him? So instead of thinking about characters on the basis of good and evil, swap out the word good for other-focused and the word evil for self-focused. Because the actual defining feature of this axis is actually the locus of motivation, not objective morality. What I mean by that is this. Some characters prioritize the needs, desires, and feelings of others above their own, and those characters tend to be the superhero tropes, the good guys. On the other hand, a character who is self-focused will prioritize their own well-being and happiness over whatever is happening in the rest of the world, thus becoming, in some terms, a supervillain. What it comes down to is making a choice for creating the most good for either yourself or for other people. The selfishness of someone who chooses themselves more than other people is something that tends to be a trait often attributed to supervillains. Because while they're on their way to making their own little bubble a better place, the rest of the world is burning, and they just don't care. A neutral person on this scale would then be fighting the ubiquitous human battle of ensuring both the good of others and the good of themselves, and finding some balance, whether calm or turbulent, between the two. Again, I think the original D&D style moral alignment chart is perfectly useful and can totally be used to create really compelling three-dimensional characters. I just think I prefer the second version because I think that it's more honest and objective and realistic about how people perceive themselves and their motivations. Sure, there are people out there who believe wholeheartedly that they are compelled to do good. Like me. Type 1s, am I right? But it's much more direct to see the difference between people who put the needs of others over the needs of themselves, and vice versa. And that truly defines the difference between superheroism and supervillainy. So there you have it, super friends, my handy-dandy guide to using the moral alignment chart to create and analyze characters. Have you used this chart to design your own characters before? Do you think that my examples were on point or a little bit off? Do you have any other better examples that use this chart really well? Go ahead and pop those down in the comments below and we'll continue the conversation there. And thanks so much for watching, super friends. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give us a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more superheroic content every single Saturday. You can join the team by following us on social media or supporting us over on Patreon. And if you want to see my own books, which contain superheroes of all sorts of different alignments, superheroes and supervillains, and some neutral characters, you can go on over to our website at www.fearlessnerd.com and check out some books that may just contain your new favorite characters. Thanks again for watching, super friends, and we'll see you next week.